Welcome back to Life's Next Lesson Plan. Today's episode is for anyone who has ever felt that tug, that nudge in your gut that says maybe it's time for something new. I'm so excited to introduce you to someone I've admired from afar for years and finally got to connect with in person, and now for this new chapter in my life. Our guest today started her career in education, but like many teachers, she reached a moment where staying no longer felt aligned. Instead of feeling stuck, she made a leap, a brave one, into entrepreneurship, motherhood, and a completely new career that gives her what she was craving most: freedom, flexibility, and fulfillment. Today, she'll share how she navigated the transition out of teaching, built a thriving business as a virtual assistant and Hugh and Grace representative, and learned to trust her intuition, even when the path ahead wasn't fully clear. If you've ever wondered what's possible when you rewrite the rules for your own life, this conversation is for you. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Life's Next Lesson Plan. I'm Rachel, and I started this podcast during my 29th and last year as a high school teacher. The goal of my work with Life's Next Lesson Plan, as well as my Live and Learn Patreon, is to create a connection where we are all teachers. We all have lessons and stories to share that can help others. I'm so fortunate to be able to extend the four walls of my previous classroom to an unlimited audience, where we can all learn from each other. And my guests are some of the most inspirational people with the best stories and lessons I know, which is why I want to share them with you. Their words are something everyone should hear. It is my hope that you are able to take away something from each episode to apply to your own life, whether that be a career search, path to a more fulfilling life, or new ideas on current topics. I'm so honored today to introduce you to our guest, Sammy Christofferson. It's funny because actually I was thinking about when I first met Sammy, and I was trying to remember if I had ever met her in person or not, because some of my guests I have never met in person. And I think I did meet her one time and one time only. Years and years ago when we were both in the Beachbody world. I think we met at one of the conventions along the way. So I have technically met her one time in person, but I definitely was joking with her before recording that I do follow her on social media, have always admired her, and you will definitely see why after this conversation today. She's just very brave, very self-assured, confident, knows what she wants. She's very much like me, into routine and knows what works for her. And so I just really have always admired her from afar and definitely had to have her on the podcast. So that's how I know Sammy, but I will let her give you a little bit more about her specific background before we launch into our conversation today. So welcome, Sammy.
Hi, thank you so much for all your kind words. It's kind of surreal to me that we're here like this many years later, which is just crazy. But yes, previously, I guess, to what I'm doing now, I was in the education world for what feels like a short time in the grand scheme of things. But ever since I was a young child, being a teacher was the only thing that I ever wanted to do, and so I grew up kind of knowing that's what I wanted to do. I went to college with no questions. That's what I wanted to do. And actually graduated a little bit early, pushed through some tough classes, got my student teaching done, got into the education world. And over the first, 3 years that I was in education, and the only 3 years I really taught school, I kind of realized that it wasn't all that it was cracked up to be. There was a lot of things that were very different than I had remembered them when I had the budding passion as a child. And even teachers, I feel like, who were around back then will say that a lot has changed in that amount of time. And so it really ended up being a very interesting experience for me. And I don't think it was anything specific. There was no specific person who, deterred me from the profession or anything like that. But I quickly came to realize that the life that I wanted to live for myself and my family was not going to be supported by that environment. And I had to, kind of make the change at the time when it was crazy, which was the end of COVID, and kind of build a couple of different businesses for myself and really take that leap of faith and realize that I wanted to do something different and kind of just learn by doing and taking action and figuring it out along the way. And here we are now. I think this was the 6th school year possibly that I've been out of the classroom, 5th or 6th, that I've been out of the classroom and home with my kids and working my own businesses. So that's a little bit about my backstory with education.
Yeah, that's so amazing. And you were an elementary school teacher, right?
Yes. So I was licensed K through 6, and I only ever taught 4th grade. I taught 4th grade at a very small charter school. My first school year, it was in Brooklyn Park. So it was very low income, high needs situation, which did not bother me at all. It was fun. I loved the kids. I loved the staff. And then I moved to the public district a year after that and worked in the public district for 2 years, and the pay was better, but the requirements were very different. And that was a very eye-opening experience for me. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely a lot of my listeners are educators for sure, either current or previous. And I always am interested just because one of the guests that I had on wrote a book about just kind of leaving education, what other opportunities there are. And she had a checklist in there of like, is it end of year teacher fatigue, which all teachers have, or is it time for a change? And when I was contemplating this decision for a few years now, I was like, oh, all my colleagues too would say, oh, you're just tired, or, oh, it's just winter. This is how we always feel in winter. And I was like, no, I feel different. Like things that used to, like my favorite class that used to bring me joy is no longer even bringing me joy, right? And just the putting on an act hour after hour each day. Can you speak to a little bit of just like how you knew, especially so early, that it was time for a change? Like was it an intuition kind of feeling or?
Yeah. So my last school year was the year of COVID, which was a psychotic year in itself with a lot of changes and challenges and, a lot of navigating of situations that nobody had ever been through before. So kind of just prefacing with, that was the situation everyone was in and nobody really knew how to deal with it or move forward or, put things in place to kind of help teachers in that time, I would say. And so actually the year that I had left was like that spring. We had been doing distance learning for however 4 months or whatever it was, or a couple months. And there were just a couple of instances that really stuck out to me that made my decision easier, I would say. It kind of pushed me over the ledge without trying to be dramatic about it. And one of the things that really bothered me a lot, just throughout that whole school year, honestly, and even, when we weren't distance learning and there wasn't a pandemic, was kind of just this idea that as a young person in the profession, you were never trusted to know what you were doing. And I don't know if that was just like my specific situation or if it's more universally across, other schools, other districts, but and I understand the idea of checks and balances, like you need to be observed and you need to be able to grow and like all those things. But the way that all had kind of happened, being judged by people, who have power, who aren't teachers in the classroom, was something that really didn't make sense to me, just like in general. And I didn't like that was what was happening, was like the person who's in charge of my bonuses and the person who's giving me a score on an observation really doesn't know what they're talking about when they're, writing those reports and things like that. So that was one thing that I really did not like. And then another thing is just I really liked and was taught in school, which I feel like a lot of us are taught when you're going to school for education, is to meet the needs of the students. Like that to me is like what should be your number one goal as a teacher. And I feel like that is very much turned away from in the public education world, in the idea that you're supposed to be teaching to a cookie cutter a cookie cutter, different, what's the word I'm looking for is, um,
It's like we're not manufacturing widgets that are all the same. You're literally dealing with 25 kids who each have individual needs. There's no one
correct.
size fits all for that.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so just the idea that, okay, you have to teach this same curriculum, this same way, you have to say these same things and give these same tests. And if you don't, you get slapped on the wrist for it and you get, I guess reprimanded, but like, not trying to be dramatic, but
Right.
like you get reprimanded for it, especially in those first 3 years that you're teaching because you're probationary. So you can't, you have no flexibility. You have no, like intuitive mind thinking for yourself as a teacher. And also, I just feel like coming from that first year where I was at a charter school and had a lot more freedom to do what I knew my students were capable of, or, change courses and do what they needed for that time period, and having that flexibility, and then moving to the public district that didn't have that, and where you were actually, I guess, like encouraged not to do that, like did not make sense to me morally. Like I didn't feel good about that. And I would say, growing up, one of the reasons I wanted to be a teacher is because I wanted to help kids be successful adults. Like that's another goal of mine that like I always had. And when you get, again, like kind of reprimanded for doing certain things that are helping them be more successful, but necessarily aren't to the typical standards for what you're supposed to stick to, again, you get reprimanded. And I didn't personally feel like that was doing the kids justice, and it wasn't something that sat well with me. And so that kind of just, there were instances like that that kind of just kept coming up over throughout the school year. And then at the end of the year, it was my third year, teaching, but it was only my second year in the public school district. So essentially, I was still probationary. I still had to, fight for my job again for the next year. I had been in the same position, in the same grade at the same school for 2 years. And the principal had said that I was essentially going to have to interview against the other younger teacher who was in the district. She was there 1 year after me. So I had 1 year of seniority on her in our same positions. And she wasn't choosing to pick either of us. We had to interview against each other to go back.
Whoa.
Yeah. And it was that moment I looked at Sam and I said, I don't want to do that. I was like, I don't want to be a part of that at all.
Wow. That's crazy. And just I'm laughing because the teacher shortage now, they'd be begging people to be like, please stay, please stay.
Yep.
Wow.
To me, I was like, I've been here for a whole extra year. Not anything
Yeah.
bad about her. She was great. She was fun to work with. She was, we enjoyed each other. We're still friends now, actually, and we still see each other now. And I just didn't like that I was being put in that situation, and it really left a bad taste in my mouth. And so I got on, it was Zoom meetings again because it was COVID. So I got on my Zoom meeting with the principal and I said, you know what? Like, actually, I'm going to choose not to reapply. I said, I will sub in the building because I have no problem with the building or, the relationships that I'd formed and with a lot of the teachers in that building. And I was like, I'll sub if I want to, but I'm going to kind of try to figure it out on my own. And that was kind of my push out the door and decision to make a different future, I guess.
Yeah. And so many things you said I can relate to. I mean, just long story short, the public education system in the last few years, it's been really eye-opening to me, some of the things that are having to happen. And I'll just leave it at that. But then also just how the universe gives you kind of a strong nudge, right? Like, had you felt better in the situation, had that not happened to you, you may have stayed longer. But now when you look back, you're like, thank goodness
Yes.
it happened that way, right? And it's just so strange how life works, definitely. The number of things that I have had happen to me this year. My significant other always says, last year, if you would have resigned, you probably would have felt like 50-50. Kind of, and I was torn. And this year, 100%. The things that have happened, I'm like, yep.
It's kind of like when you get that idea and it just like burrows into your brain and keeps like coming back and coming back and coming back. But then once you make that decision, I feel like you can kind of free yourself to fully embrace that idea.
Yeah.
And that I like, again, like you said, that's when it like kind of turns that like 100% like this is the right decision.
Yeah. And I made that decision because I had been talking about it, and I made it kind of late fall. So it's been a long, like, like knowing that I was going to leave. But once I made that decision, I was like, you have to be almost like 2 feet into the next chapter so that you can devote yourself to that, because that was a whole rebuilding too. And that's what I kind of want to ask you next is, it seems like it was sort of abrupt. I mean, you weren't like 4 years kind of planning that you were going to be leaving. And so how did that work? You didn't have kids at the time, right?
No.
So how did your transition work?
Yeah. So, at the time I was still running my Beachbody business, and it was interesting because I, at that point, had hit the amount of success where my income that I was bringing in from that was actually matching my teacher's salary. And so, like, again, like, it was great. We were actually wedding planning. Weren't even married yet. We were getting married that following fall from that spring. So, I told my husband, I was like, this is what we can do. Like, and if I had more time to devote to, building my own business, like, who knows, like, where that could continue to go. And I said, I know it's not like steady income that you can always rely on, but I was like, I still can sub, like I can sub a little bit. And so I did end up doing that. Actually, we had our wedding in the fall, and then throughout that next school year, I actually got pregnant with our daughter like a month after our wedding. And so I was pregnant for that whole next, winter to spring to summer. And I did sub quite a bit. I was a medical sub for a student for I think like 5 or 6 weeks straight at like the end of that school year. And so I always knew that that was an option. And I always knew that, okay, let's say I tried this for a year and it doesn't work out, I can go back to education and that's okay. And like maybe I just needed a break and whatever. So I knew I always had options, and I tried to just be open to those options and be like, okay, like I'm making this decision and I'll figure out how to make it work, and I'll do what I need to do to make it work. And so it really, it wasn't like a long time thought out plan. It was more, okay, like I'm going to make this jump. I had this summer because obviously like you're paid through the summer.
Mm-hmm.
Like we had a 12-month pay. And so I was paid through the summer so I could kind of, figure out what my business routine was going to be, what that was going to look like if I needed to. Again, I think I also reffed volleyball that summer, just like as like extra cash, And I always knew there was going to be stuff that would come up that I could do if needed, and that I would figure it out and make it work.
Mm-hmm. And obviously your future husband, now husband, was supportive in the situation. But then, as some of my listeners will know, Beachbody changed. And had you started another stream of income before that change, or did the change spark you to look into other directions?
So, interesting that you asked. That also kind of goes into, I know one of the things that we'll probably talk about is any sort of like mentors that were, helpful. And I will say, so I want to say it was almost probably a year and a half before Body had announced that they were, closing the partner opportunity and that chapter was done. One of my mentors had said, like, I've been in this business for a long time. I just don't have a good feeling about this. And she knew like it would impact me a lot because that was my only income at the time. We had just moved to our new house like 6 months prior to that. So like our mortgage was more like, we had all these other things going on, and she knew that that change would impact me if that were to be like how things went down. And so about a year and a half before it actually happened, she had told a lot of her leaders who she knew this decision would impact a lot. She said, I just like don't foresee these decisions that they're making in the company at this time to be leading somewhere positive. And if I were you, I would start kind of looking at other income opportunities, whatever that looks like for you. And it's interesting because maybe like a month or two after she had said that, I had been following a guy on Instagram who had done a training for our team many years prior, and he had posted looking for a virtual assistant. And he just posted on a story, apply at the link, whatever. And I was like, God, like, I feel like that's something that I would be really good at because it would use a lot of the skills that I really enjoy. And like, I'm a super type A organized, planners, lists, like all that kind of stuff is like my jam and what I like, how I function personally. And so when he had posted that, I was like, oh, I've never thought about doing that. But like, I think that would be an awesome option. It would be something that would really fit my person and like my skill set. And so I, on a whim, applied. I had no training. I had no experience, literally nothing. And they always say, like, don't do that. And I'm like, no, like, throw your hat in the ring, figure it out. Like, you know? So I randomly applied. I got a first round interview, and then I got a second round interview, and then found out in, I think it was early February of 2023 that I had gotten the position. And it was part-time. It was 20 hours a week. And I was like, this is great. Like, this will be perfect for this period of time, because I still had my thriving body business at that time. I have this other now 20-hour a week thing that was going on. And our daughter at the time was about 1.5 years old. So like, we had a good routine with her. Like, we weren't in the newborn trenches or anything like that. So that's where it started. And I got, hired by him. And then he actually opened the door to a second client of mine about 1.5 years ago now. And so it kind of just snowballed from there. And now I'm like, I have all these people who want this service that I don't have the hours for it anymore. So it's interesting to see how that has grown and how my own confidence in that space has grown because of the experience that then I've accumulated. But it's interesting how, all these connections make sense, because if I wouldn't have been doing body, I never would have seen his post. I never would have followed him. I never would have seen his post. I never would have applied. So it's interesting. And now like that is my full-time job, and that's what I do. And then when body closed its doors, because then, by that point I had grown that to my virtual assistant job to be my full-time income, and body was just extra, which it felt really good, honestly, to just have that be extra and not be my full-time job. And so I was like, well, I'd really like to continue having extra income besides my full-time income, because who doesn't want more money coming in through their household, right? Like that's always a good thing. And so actually previous still to body closing, I had been using a brand that I had used for my skincare, and I'd switched to, and that's kind of how then I ended up partnering with Hugh and Grace. Was I had already been using the stuff and loving the stuff, and then, body closed its doors, and then I could kind of pivot on that front too, to a different stream of income. So that's a long story.
Yeah, no, it's great, because again, a big thing is people think that they have to have their next 5-year plan all figured out. And you are a living, breathing example of like, I took a risk. I had something. I knew I had skills. I knew I could sub, right? But you couldn't have seen 3 years, 5 years down the road that this is what you would be doing, right? And so sometimes it is sort of that blind leap of faith and thinking positively. And I have said on this show many times that every day is a job interview, whether you realize it or not. And that's exactly what has happened for you at your first VA job. You obviously did so well that he recommended you to somebody else, right? And who recommends you to somebody else. And now you're like, I can't keep up. Yeah. And that's just, I think, another important reminder for people too. And it's what I really like too, and was always envious of you, and really a lot of your messaging from following you for so long helped me in my decision, because you were like, I believe in the products that I'm sharing, and I just put myself out there, and I'm just living my life, and it's all going well. And I'm like, yeah, I can do that, right? So a lot of the things that you talk about liking in your transition, like time freedom, and you have little ones. I have one coming to your state to go to college, my only daughter. So I kind of wanted it to look different in this chapter too. I mean, can you speak to sort of how that feels? I know you mention it a lot on social media, but for those who don't follow you, just the blessings that has brought compared to, I mean, teaching is nice in a way when you have kids because you do have the holidays and you do have the summers. But every Friday you're burnt out. I know I'm grading papers, lesson planning. And so can you just speak to a little bit more about like the difference in your day to day, what it allows you to do?
Yeah, I will say that is probably my favorite perk. And like you said, I do talk about it a lot because it is my favorite perk of, what I've built, especially when my kids are young. But I can also, like you said, like see it as your kids get older to have the flexibility to go to the sports games, to, move your kid into college, to be able to have that freedom. And I would say, for me, and this is a memory that is burned into my brain. I will never forget it. It was the summer before I was starting my first year teaching. I was working at a summer camp, as a lot of teachers do. They do, the summer latchkeys or the summer fun programs or whatever. And so I was doing that, and I was teaching kindergarteners at the time. And I got a text message that my grandfather, who we call Pappy, he was my favorite person that I pretty much ever had in my life. Like he had every fun childhood memory for me and involved him. And he had to have a quadruple bypass and was in the hospital. And I had to stay up late and make sub plans and call KidStop and tell them that I needed to go to Duluth and I had a lot of extra stress. Not only was I stressed about what was happening in my family, but I was stressed about then having all these added things that I had to do before I could go and be there for my family. And at that time, then not only was I prepping for someone to be there, but I was also then again, like not getting paid because I was out, I was out doing what I needed to do to be with my family. And I luckily, got the pizza or got the time off to go do that. I prepped for someone else to be there for me and got to go and be up there for a day. And luckily the procedure went well and, all of that. And that was great. He ended up passing away earlier this year from just, a lot of health complications later on. But this was like now 7 or 8 years ago. So at that time, he had pulled through that and made it through that. And I remember thinking, I don't love the fact that I have to not only ask people for time off, but plan for someone to be there while I'm gone. Like I'm doing the work for them and I'm still gone. And, I just did not like that whole situation. And so from that time, and then, other random things that had come up over the years that I wasn't teaching, I don't know if you remember the Beachbody cruises, but I got to go on the cruise. I'd earned the cruise. I was so excited. It was not during spring break. And as a teacher, you get 3 days of PTO per year, and the cruise was 5 days long. So I decided to go on the cruise because I wanted the life experience. I love to travel. That was like a big thing that meant a lot to me. And I left on the cruise, prepped all the sub plans for the 5 days I was going to be on. I had to do dock days for the last 2 days that I was gone out of those 5 days. I could not use my sick time. I hadn't been sick a single day that whole school year. I had 11 sick days in the bank. I couldn't use either of them for those last 2 days of that week. And out of my paycheck that week, or that pay period, my paycheck was normally $1,100 every 2 weeks. I had been docked $800 of pay for those 2 days that I was gone. So my paycheck that week was $300, and I had to pay $800 to cover my sub for those 2 days because they did not fit into the PTO. And I had to pay my health insurance those 2 days because they did not fit into the PTO.
Oh, my word.
And so those 2 instances made me relish the time freedom that I have now to be able to do what works on our schedule, to be able to say yes to the random lunch dates with my friends who I don't get to see very often, to be able to drop things to go to Duluth for the day and see a grandparent, see a family member, be able to go be other places for other people or for my children at the drop of a hat. I have the flexibility to do that, and it has meant the world to me. And I think it's really changed a lot of how I view relationships with people because I've been able to pour more of myself into growing those relationships with other friends, family members, and my kids, which to me is worth everything, would make me make that decision 10 times over and over again. So that's kind of, that's a long,
and that part of, your life is really where I was like, it's possible. Like I do not have to be stuck in four walls of a classroom. I did this for 29 years. I had an amazing career. I need other things out of this next chapter. And you just have to trust that it's going to work out. Not that it's not scary, not that it's not bittersweet, right? There's all the emotions that come with it. But I so appreciate you sharing that, because I think a lot of people are looking for just, especially you don't want to get to the end of your life and think, oh, I regret not being able to do this. I regret not being able to spend more time, or when you're in the moment, right? Like, I just want to be able to take this 5-day cruise that I earned, and, can't people just support me and like make it work? So I completely relate to what you're saying. I think what we'll do here is we'll give Sammy a little bit of a break to catch her breath. She's been telling us so much about her life. And then when we come back, we will chat a little bit more and get to hear Sammy's lesson. It is time for Ask the Teacher Anything. And since I'm in the last week, days, hours, minutes of being a teacher, the most common question I'm getting this week is, how are you feeling in the last week of teaching? And, it's like with any big event in life, it's surreal. It doesn't hit you right immediately. I mean, looking at an empty classroom and saying goodbye, it just feels like, whose life is this? I've prepared, obviously, for so long for this that it feels right. I have some trepidation. I'm already starting to get anxious, for what's going to be next and what it's going to look like. So I'm really going to have to force myself to just enjoy and really, trying to keep the connections that are important with, from my previous chapter that are important to me, trying to keep those connections alive, because, those people become a part of your daily life, like eating lunch with the same people and knowing you're going to see the same faces every day. So yeah, that's kind of the things that I'm thinking about, and, just thinking about, the last questions that I got about next year's yearbook this year, and watching the person move into my room, and it's just all bittersweet. I know it's right, but it's still hard. And, just there's so much unknown, and I just don't do great with unknown, but I know that it's time, and I'm going to try to follow all of what I preach in the next chapter. So thank you. I guess maybe follow me on social media in the next month or two, and I start to process, and we'll see what happens. The second question are, what are your upcoming camping trips? So talking about the next chapter, right? So I think I had mentioned that we had planned all close in Wisconsin trips for this summer. So we have one more trip in June. We're staying at a place in the Dells. We have a lot of favorite restaurants up there, and of course, Devil's Lake. And then last time we rented a jet ski, which is really fun. So we're doing that in June. In July, we're going to Governor Dodge State Park, which we did camp tent there before. Now we're taking the Luna Rover. In August, we are going to Door County, one of our favorite places. And then in September, we are going to Coler Andre, which I've never been to, but have heard it's really beautiful. So, buying this camper, kind of the promise was we were going to use it once a month, and, get the feel for it, see how it goes. So those are our upcoming trips with the camper. We always, if you follow me, you know that we're tourists in our own state. We're always doing a lot of city hopping. I definitely want to get back to Waupun, possibly Lake Geneva, possibly Port Washington, just for like a day trip. So lots of fun stuff coming up. Thank you so much for asking. Okay, we are back from break, and I feel like Sammy has already packed multiple lessons into this episode, because she's so forthright about sharing her journey and It's so helpful. Again, if you don't follow her already on social media, I'll put some links in the show notes for you. But she's just very authentic, and I've just always really appreciated that about her. But I want to hear, because I know she's very prepared and definitely still has that little bit of teacher in her, even though she's not in a classroom, she still teaches people things every day. So I'm eager to hear all about her lesson that she has for us today. So you are up, Sammy.
Yes. So I feel like this sometimes for people can be very much so easier said than done. But, I really encourage people, and if you're listening, I encourage you to think about the things in your life that are making you feel stuck or unfulfilled or that you'd like to change, and understand that you do have the power to change them. Even if you're someone who doesn't feel like you maybe do, or you don't feel like there's an opportunity out there for you. And knowing that you don't have to stay stuck in the things that aren't bringing you joy, aren't showing you growth, aren't bringing you forward, aren't helping you hit the goals that you have, for your personal life, for your family. That feeling is not normal. I feel like we normalize that feeling of feeling stuck because everyone feels that way, or this is just how it is, or this is just how it's supposed to feel. And you don't have to play to that narrative. You can create your own narrative. And I feel like that's something that, I've proven, multiple, multiple times throughout this entrepreneur season of life, and having to pivot. And I think, doing the work on yourself and on your mental health and on your physical health can really help you kind of open up the door to understanding that you don't have to adhere to what other people might deem as normal, or feelings that might feel like you're not doing what you should be doing, and listen to that intuition and take action to do something about it.
Yeah, it really speaks to me, because we were chatting a little bit about this previously, but when you get to this stage in teaching where people are so close to retirement, everybody's saying, like, I just need to hold on for this many years. And I definitely felt like guilt, or like, what is wrong with me that I can't make it? Like, I literally can't hold on. I am not myself. I always promised myself, because when I was a young teacher and I saw people close to retirement basically putting their feet up and just like not caring anymore, which I totally get. I'm not as invested as I used to be in teaching. I don't like feeling like that. I promised myself I would walk away. Even if it meant leaving some of my pension money on the table, I'm walking away with no insurance benefits. It's terrifying, as a single mother especially. But I made that promise to myself that is not the legacy. I'm so proud of my career. I'm not proud of this last year of teaching. Even though I gave it everything I still had, it was not what I would say was typical of me as a teacher. And that's the hardest thing, right? Is like staying true to yourself and not listening to those messages of everyone like, well, this is what I'm doing, or this is what teachers do. We just wait it out. And I'm like, well, that's not my story. That's not my narrative. But it's hard, right?
It is so hard. And I would say, like, at the beginning, I felt a lot of guilt too, because I was so young, and people are like, oh, you didn't even give it 5 years. You didn't, or, you went to school for 4 years for that. You paid for a degree for that. Now you're not even using it. Now you don't even have like an active teacher license anymore, all these things. And I, I feel like that's just people's own limiting beliefs, or, they don't understand that there might be more out there for you. And I think it's really important that you do the things that you need to do to care for yourself. And that's so much easier said than done, especially I feel like moms, like we don't feel like we, can do some of those things for ourselves to help ourselves feel like the actual version of ourselves that we're supposed to be, because it's clouded by all of these other things that are going on. And I think that was something that very early on I just got rid of. I'm like, I don't want to feel miserable. I don't have to feel miserable. Like, I can do something about it. I can make this change. I can, change different things that I'm doing in my life, change the environments that I'm in, because I know there's always that saying about like plants, like in their environments, and they thrive or they don't, and it has to do with their environments that they're in. And we, I would say, are very much the same way. If you are not in good environments, not only in your home with your family, with your relationships, but your profession is part of that. Your job that you go to every day is part of that. And don't feel like you have to stay miserable. Please don't.
Yeah,
Please don't.
I love that. That's interesting because I'm looking at the teaching thing from the end of the career spectrum, but there's definitely people I've talked to as listeners of this show who have said, but I have this degree and I'm still paying off student loans and I'm going to switch. But if you think about it, you had to start there, right? You had to have that experience in order for it to lead you to this experience and the life that you wanted, right? It may not have worked out this way had you not done it. And like you are making a promise to yourself. We tell students like change your major, change your degree, do what's right for you, right? This is the same kind of thing. Why, I'm going to be miserable for 10 years so that I feel like I got my degree's worth, right, out of it. But I just look at everything as a stepping stone, right? It's not like you were saying, well, I'm never going to work again. And and even if you did, so what? You tried it, you got the degree. You can always, as you said, pivot. And I love that because especially in my generation, it was you become a teacher and you stay a teacher your whole life. And now that is just not how our society works. We didn't have entrepreneurs and multiple streams of income. And these are new concepts, I think, for a lot of people too. And if they, didn't see their parents do it or they're not familiar with it, it's maybe a little bit even more unsettling to them. But I think you just have to open your eyes. And I always tell people if you're on social media, follow people whose lives you admire. And, if that means I follow a lot of women who are in their 60s and 70s who are super fit and active. And that's what I want to be, right?
Yeah.
I follow people who have time freedom and who aren't afraid to take risks so that they can live a happy, fulfilled life. And so, right, then that's where you learn about how to get creative and how to make that happen.
Yep.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to share with us today? You've shared so many amazing messages. And like I said, she's just so brave and so herself. I mean, what you see is what you get. This is Sammy. And I encourage you to follow her if you're not already. She's just such a breath of fresh air, and she has the cutest children as well.
We're pretty biased.
And obviously you must have a very supportive spouse too. And truly, if I wasn't in the relationship that I'm in now, someone who just, I think, gets it and also left a high-paying corporate job to seek some of the things that we're talking about, I think that's really helpful too.
Yeah, and he really is. Like, we have always had that kind of relation. I mean, even when we were young, because we started dating when I was 20 years old. And so we've been together a very long time, and we've kind of always ebbed and flowed through kind of supporting each other through the different things that we're doing. He used to compete in weightlifting, and, I would support him in that. And he went and got his master's. He's actually also a teacher and is still a teacher.
Right.
So that's a fun fact.
And now you're supporting him in his new volleyball coaching venture. Yeah.
So like we kind of always just like trade off. And obviously like I never would have made that decision without talking with him in depth before that. But I think too, he is on the same page with me as far as, we all function as better versions of ourselves when we are at peace with the things we're doing, and we feel supported, and we feel that our environments are helping us to grow and learn and develop positively. And I think he saw the opposite of that, when I was going through all the different things I was going through at that last school year. And I think that helped him kind of, be super supportive in that decision. And I'm forever grateful for him in the relationship that we have. And I think it just shows kind of like our teammate mentality for each other quite a bit.
Yeah.
But it's always been that way where we've always just, talked about it. And then I'm like, okay, what do you need me to do? Like, what do we need to do? So
that's really special and unique. And I think too, like he's getting the best version of his wife. your kids are getting the best version of you, right? And that just makes for a happier household in general. Not that there aren't tough days, right?
Right. Oh gosh. It's for one.
But it is. It's the whole show. And I think too, like, you have to be comfortable communicating that. Like, you had to say to him before you were even married, like, I'm thinking about making this major change, which we maybe didn't anticipate. And I think that's important too for people you have to share that. Otherwise, you might be secretly harboring that and continuing on in this, job you don't want to be in. So I just admire all of so many things about you, and so appreciate that you could share all of these helpful parts of your life with my listeners today. And I'm sure you'll be gaining some new followers as a result.
Yes, come on. And obviously, like I kind of shared this with you before too, but I'm very open to question. Like, if there are questions that people have, that you feel free to, send me a message, and I will share whatever I can share at that point. So.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here, Sammy. That's a wrap on today's conversation. I hope Sammy's story reminds you that you're never stuck and the life you imagine is possible, even if it looks different than you first planned. If this episode gave you a little spark of courage or clarity, share it with a friend who might need to hear it too. I do want to share with you that I have come to a decision about the podcast as I enter into this next chapter. I feel like one more solo episode, and then I'm going to close season 1 of Life's Next Lesson Plan podcast and decide if I would like to do a season 2 in the next chapter of my life. First, I would like to just take some time to decompress a little bit. I would like to get my feet under me in my new position and my new empty nest life, and just kind of see how I'm feeling. I don't want to be forced into anything. I mean, I made this decision to have more freedom and to craft the life that I want. And so I feel like this will be a nice, natural ending. I'm so happy that I was able to get Sammy on the podcast for all the reasons I shared today. And then I will have some final thoughts for you next week in my last solo episode. I'll still be on social media, on Instagram and Facebook at Life's Next Lesson Plan. And I'm hoping to, now that I'll have a little bit more time, maybe play around with my YouTube channel a little bit more. I can't believe I'm saying that because I so reluctantly set that up. But now it's just kind of like a no pressure place that I could kind of explore and, still keep up my journalistic skills without podcasting in the meantime. So definitely, if you want to keep up with my journey, social media and YouTube would be a good place to follow me. I hope this episode gave you a little spark of courage or clarity, or you just enjoyed listening to Sammy. She's such a bright light. I love following her. As always, just keep learning, keep listening to yourself, and don't be afraid to write that next lesson plan. We'll see you next week for one last time.